The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 366. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 366, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to health care, the second engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Igbaje, to explain House File 366.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Reproductive care is health care, and that includes abortion. House File 366, also known as the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act, protects patients and providers from the chilling effects and legal attacks we're seeing from around the country related to the access and provision of reproductive health care. We are in unprecedented legal territory regarding reproductive health care since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and with it, decades of legal precedent that had declared a constitutional right to abortion. Since then, neighboring states have started passing and implementing harmful laws attacking not only abortion rights, but also individual liberties and privacy more broadly. Providers now have to be concerned about the type of health care they provide and whether they will be prosecuted for giving patients the reproductive health care that they need. We are seeing laws that allow other states to reach into places like Minnesota, where abortion is legal, to prosecute doctors and patients even where it's legal. The prominent example of this is Texas's SB 8 law that deputizes individuals to enforce their state's 6-week abortion ban, allowing anyone in the state of Texas to sue anyone who helps another person obtain an abortion, even by counseling them or providing a ride to a clinic. Other examples include states like Georgia, Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, and Alabama have passed or introduced laws that criminalize abortion with penalties that can include fines, imprisonment, and/or the revocation of a medical license for the abortion provider. Seeing these laws not only just introduced and passed, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seeing that these laws are not only introduced and passed in other states, but so far allowed to stand in the courts is shocking. These increasingly radical, restrictive laws are designed to ban abortion outright, and they are not based in science, they are not based in health, and they are disrupting the legal landscape regarding rights related to health care. And as Minnesotans, we cannot sit idly by. The Reproductive Freedom Defense Act is creating strong protections for Minnesotans' own healthcare providers and residents against legal attacks and criminal penalties that are being imposed in abortion-restrictive states. This legislation would prevent Minnesota's courts and institutions from being hijacked and abused in service of a harmful agenda from those outside Minnesota. House File 366 ensures that the law governing the release of health records excludes out-of-state subpoenas and court orders for records when in relation to laws from other states that restrict or punish the provision, receipt, or attempted provision or receipt of reproductive health care services to patients. This ensures that disclosure laws cannot be weaponized for other states' prosecution of health care that is protected under Minnesota law. This bill also protects physicians, physician's assistants, and nurses from disciplinary action or not receiving a license solely because they may be coming from another state that has anti-abortion laws targeting healthcare providers. Further, this bill protects Minnesotans from laws encouraging citizens to sue individuals for providing or helping someone obtain abortion care, and allows anyone sued in another state under one of these laws to countersue in Minnesota to recover costs affiliated with that case. It also ensures that Minnesota's courts will not enforce out-of-state judgments for these types of lawsuits. In essence, this bill protects Minnesotans from prosecution by other states over what is legal in Minnesota. Doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers have been engaged at every hearing in support of this policy. They have told us how they witnessed the fear and confusion introduced by these laws among their patients and their colleagues here in Minnesota, not to mention their colleagues in other states. We heard earlier from a doctor in Texas who had relocated to Minnesota after SB 8 was passed because he knew that in order to help his community, he had to leave his community to practice in a place where he could provide and refer for appropriate care. And passing out on your desk, you'll see you have letters in support of this bill from various medical associations of professionals and students. Minnesota healthcare providers support this law, and they need us to act to protect them and their patients. By a wide margin, Minnesota voters support protecting abortion access, and even more support protections for providers and patients around abortion. Reproductive health care is about the ability to make decisions for yourself with the consultation of your own doctor. And this bill ensures that Minnesotans can do what is legal and exercise their rights in Minnesota without threat of prosecution from other states. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House Bill number 366.
Third reading. Discussion to House File 366. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, well, it's another big day here in Minnesota, and we've heard the rallying cries outside for this bill, which is very troubling on such a serious issue as the life and death of a child. To be really excited to see a bill like this pass that will make abortion, that will make Minnesota a sanctuary state and a destination state for people wanting to come here and end their pregnancies. Reproductive care, by the definitions in this bill, is not health care for the unborn child. Let's make that really, really clear here. Only one person is seen as getting health care in this bill, and it certainly is not the unborn child that has taken it all into consideration. This is an extreme bill that disregards the priority of the rule of law in exchange for ensuring only the lives of wanted children are allowed to happen. Would Representative Agbaje yield for a question, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Agbaje will yield to a question. Representative Scott.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Agbaje, does this bill allow a Minnesota abortion provider to use telemedicine to prescribe a chemical abortion drug to a woman in a state, a woman or a girl in a state where the chemical abortion drug is outlawed?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Scott, for the question. So this bill, as long as the providers for telehealth are providing legal reproductive health care in Minnesota, they are allowed to do that under the current telehealth laws.
Representative Scott.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Agbaje, well, so folks, this isn't obviously just a law here that we're making for Minnesotans. We're making a law for other states to allow the breaking of a law in another state. And no one here is going to be held accountable for that. Would Representative Agbaje yield to another question?
Representative Agbaje will yield to another question. Representative Scott.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Agbaje, if there's an abortion provider here that doesn't exactly have a great track record, like maybe women are being injured on a fairly regular basis, would that person still be protected here under this law?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Scott. This law does not cover anyone who is charged and credibly found with malpractice issues. This is only covering lawful reproductive health care in Minnesota. So if you have any malpractice or tort issues, you would not be protected.
Representative Scott.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is a dangerous bill that makes Minnesota an outlier. It turns the rule of law on its head in relationship to our cooperation that has always taken place between other states, and makes us a destination state for people to do things like bring trafficked children to the state of Minnesota to get an abortion. I don't know how people in good conscience can support that. This is a bill that is going to give Minnesota a black eye in many respects. And that's sad. Members, once again, this bill is only health care for one person. That's the pregnant woman. It's not health care for the unborn child. It's the end of that child's life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion to House File 366. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The first day we were here, January 3rd, except for one member who wasn't here that day, we all swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. He swore, Representative Bliss swore that oath the next day. But we all swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. I think the first test every one of us should apply to every piece of legislation is whether it's consistent with that oath, whether it satisfies that constitutional test. And members, this bill does not satisfy that test. The U.S. Constitution in its full faith and credit clause says that full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. And Congress has passed a law, the Full Faith and Credit Act, that enforces that by providing that such acts, records, and judicial proceedings or copies thereof so authenticated shall have the same full faith and credit in every court within the United States and its territories and possessions as they have in the law or usage of the courts of such state from which they are taken. Members, this isn't just a dead letter. This is an important part of our constitutional fabric. The late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in a majority opinion in 1998 for the U.S. Supreme Court, described this as the, quote, animating purpose of the full faith and credit clause. And she quoted some earlier precedent which said that it was to alter the status of the several states as independent foreign sovereignties, each free to ignore obligations created under the laws or by the judicial proceedings of the other, and to make them integral parts of a single nation. That's where we were before we entered into our Constitution. We were all different. All the states were different foreign jurisdictions that could disagree, that could refuse to enforce the judgments of different states. And an integral part of our constitutional order was the full faith and credit clause that said, if you get a judgment in one state, every other state's going to honor that judgment. When we have judicial proceedings that go forward in other states, whether we agree with the law or disagree with the law, once that state has entered a judgment or done some judicial proceeding, every state honors those legal judgments. This bill is the most blatant possible violation of the full faith and credit clause of our Constitution. Sections 6 and 7 in particular fly directly in the face of the full faith and credit clause and say, if you get a judgment in another state, if Minnesota, we don't like it, we're not going to enforce it. Not only are we not going to enforce it, we're going to let you countersue for that amount in another state. No state on any other issue has ever done anything like this. Minnesota never does this. It's the most blatantly unconstitutional provision possible under the full faith and credit clause, and that's the reason why the Attorney General's office anticipates legal challenges. On page 6 of the fiscal note, the Attorney General's office anticipates legal challenges, but they say, don't worry about it. We're going to be able to handle it. We have the staff to handle it. Well, members, 6 weeks ago, we were talking about the resources that are needed in the Attorney General's office to do basic public safety. And we passed out of this House more funding for the Attorney General's office to do basic public safety. Members, we have to stop creating more make work for them by passing unconstitutional laws that are going to just create more and more work. But more fundamentally, members, this is a violation of our oath, and frankly, it's a sad day in the history of Minnesota. Minnesota has a proud history of standing for our constitutional union. We all stood today and pledged allegiance to one nation under God, indivisible, indivisible. Minnesota has a proud history of standing for the union, standing against secessionist movements that would try to tear our union apart because of disagreements about policy issues. But today is a sad day. We're taking a step in the wrong direction as the state of Minnesota. We're prioritizing an extreme position on one particular policy issue, the most extreme abortion policy possible, and we're saying that is so important that we are striking a blow against the constitutional order. We are telling other states that even if you get a judgment in your other state, if we in the state of Minnesota don't agree with it, we're not enforcing it. But just on this one issue, because we believe so strongly in our most extreme abortion policy in the entire country, that we are going to strike against our constitutional order. So members, for the sake of the oath that we all took to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota, I urge you to vote no on House File 366.
Further discussion to House File 366. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm perplexed. We heard this bill in committee, I don't know, it's probably been at least a month now. And frankly, I don't view this as an abortion bill, really. Frankly, the majority has already done that. The majority has already passed the most extreme abortion laws in the entire country, really the world. We already have full access to any abortion for any reason at any point in pregnancy in the state of Minnesota. That already exists here, thanks to our Democrat colleagues. This bill isn't about abortion. This bill is about a respect for the rule of law, or more appropriately, a lack of respect for the rule of law. That's what this bill is. And frankly, I'll be honest with you, and I said this to Representative Agbaje in committee, there are actually portions of this bill that I agree with. Things that happen in the state of Minnesota that are legal within the state of Minnesota, other states should not have the ability to reach into Minnesota and harm, prosecute, whatever, people who have engaged in lawful activity within the state of Minnesota. I actually agree with that. And I would agree with that on any issue. But that's not where this bill stops. This bill completely obliterates any respect for the rule of law. This bill says that if folks commit crimes in other states, if folks commit felony offenses, if they are convicted of felony offenses in other states, the state of Minnesota must disregard those offenses. The state of Minnesota must disregard a felony offense or any other conviction related to things that the Democrats really care about here. This is such a bizarre and frankly unique law. And as Representative Niska indicated, frankly unconstitutional. And I guess the only good news is that this bill, if it becomes law, won't stand. I guess that's the only good news here. But again, we continue to fund the Attorney General's office to then defend unconstitutional laws that we pass. It seems like there is a better option here, that we could just choose to pass constitutional laws. We could choose to understand that the rule of law is critical. It is foundational, not just here in Minnesota, but in our country. But this bill says we don't care about that anymore. This bill says that folks who have been convicted of crimes in other states will have that all absolved here in Minnesota. It's wrong. We should be concerned about the character of people who are willing to commit crime in other states and then coming here to Minnesota to have those things absolved, and they continue their lives as they would. We should be concerned about the character of those people. But instead, we're going to reward it. We are going to reward breaking the law. We are going to reward behavior that leads to felony convictions in other states. We're going to say, come to Minnesota. We'll have you. We'll take you. Folks, it's wrong. And again, abortion is already available in the state of Minnesota. This bill does not change that. It doesn't add to it. It doesn't expand your access to abortion. It does none of those things. All it does is say that criminals in another state, you can just come to Minnesota. We'll take you. You won't be a criminal here. That's a problem, folks. Of all places, we in this body, we in this institution of lawmakers should respect the rule of law. I sure hope folks will see that. They'll understand that this is not an abortion bill, that this is a rule of law bill, and every vote on that board should be read.
Further discussion to House File 366. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield to a question?
She will yield to Representative Quam.
Does this bill allow a doctor to do a telehealth with someone in another state and prescribe an abortive?
Representative Quam, going forward, please direct your questions through the presiding officer. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Igbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Quam. I believe Representative Scott asked that question. This bill doesn't change the current telehealth laws that we have, so as long as the provider is providing legal health care in Minnesota, then it's covered.
Representative Quam.
Thank you. Would the author yield to a clarifying question?
Representative Igbaje, will you yield to another question? Representative Igbaje will yield. Representative Quam.
I believe I heard legal in Minnesota. So does this law allow a doctor to perform telehealth to a person in another state, and if it's legal in Minnesota but not legal in that state, this law would still allow that?
Representative Igbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Quam. Again, this bill doesn't change anything in our telehealth laws. It's just still saying that the health care that is provided by a telehealth care provider, as long as it's legal in the state of Minnesota, that is covered.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well,
0.
I have concern because telehealth is very important to a lot of our health providers here. Sanford, Mayo, et cetera, have facilities in Minnesota and other states. It is very common to do telehealth to others, not presently in the state of Minnesota. If in doing so, you break the law in that state, telehealth means you're practicing in the state of the resident and the patient. So you'd be practicing in that state, even though you're sitting here in Minnesota. So you would be breaking the law, practicing medicine in another state. This law, or this bill, if it became law, would allow for that practice. But is the unintended consequence that if a state sees doctors from Minnesota breaking their law and practicing medicine in their state because telemedicine is practicing within their state. It is very conceivable that they would not allow doctors licensed in the state of Minnesota to practice in their state because there's a history of breaking the law in their state. I would not wish that unintended consequence to come forward. I would not want to put at risk the, well, frankly, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of patients that live outside the state of Minnesota from getting medical care, telehealth medical care, which is very prevalent in our state. And our physicians working for an entity that has facilities across state lines then would be restricted from sending Minnesota personnel to those other facilities in states that border us, and that's concerning. As was stated, there are some good things in this bill. But one of the things we need to do is avoid bad things from happening. So this bill really needs some tweaking and fixing because I want to avoid unintended consequences, and I think there are errors in this bill.
Is there any further discussion of House File 366? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise just to clarify one point that was raised in the debate that I think may have gotten kind of muddled, which is this idea that somehow somebody commits a crime in another state, they flee here, and somehow this state were blocked from having, in that situation, from having that person face justice in the place where they committed the crime. Members, pages 5 through 8 talk about extradition and repeatedly use the phrase, acts committed in this state, services received in this state, repeatedly, over and over and over again. I can find like 12 different examples of that. And there's even, in case you're confused, a definition of in this state. In this state means an action taken while the person is physically present in this state, in Minnesota. So if you want to hand over control some other state, that's fine. This is saying that these are actions in Minnesota. Somebody does something in Minnesota, and in that case, these provisions apply. We're not talking about a situation somebody committing a crime in another state. Members, we should support this bill, and we should do so based on proper information regarding it. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think that, Mr. Speaker, it's important to provide further clarification. In Section 2, Subdivision 1C, if a physician is convicted of a crime in any jurisdiction, we will license them in Minnesota. In Subdivision 1A of Section 3, if a physician assistant is convicted in another jurisdiction of a felony, we will license them in the state of Minnesota. In Section 4, Subdivision 1B, if a nurse is convicted in another jurisdiction of a felony, we will license them in Minnesota. I'm very clear with my words when I say them. You can commit a felony crime. You can be convicted of a felony crime in another state, and Minnesota will welcome you. No consequences for that here in Minnesota. Members, we should be very concerned about that, and we should vote no.
Are there any other members seeking recognition to discuss House File 366? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was really hoping that I wouldn't have to speak on this today, but I think it's really important to recognize that pregnant people deserve health care, regardless of what that pregnancy ends up being. And I think it's also really important to recognize that not all laws are good laws. we used to have to extradite slaves who made it to free states and send them back to slavery. That's not right. It's not right, and history wouldn't look upon that as being correct thing to do. Abortion is health care, and people deserve health care. It's a Minnesota value to provide that health care and to take care of people. It doesn't need to get more complicated than that. This is a simple issue. People deserve to be treated well, and in my state, I want to make sure that they're welcomed with open arms to get the services and the care that they deserve and that they need. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is quite simply about protecting activity that is legal in Minnesota against interference from other states. Abortion providers in Minnesota may be subject to criminal penalties from other states, and so may those who are helping individuals travel to Minnesota to receive care. And this is not theoretical. Idaho has introduced a bill to prohibit adults from transporting minors out of the state for an abortion procedure. Missouri has introduced a law that would create a private right of action against those in any state who help a Missourian obtain an abortion. And Texas has passed a law allowing anyone to sue abortion providers for providing reproductive health care, and are planning to make it a felony for employers to pay for their employees to seek abortion care out of state. In overturning settled precedent establishing body autonomy that Americans had relied on for 50 years, Justice Alito said, "We do not pretend to know how our political system or society will respond to today's decision overruling Roe and Casey." Well, this state and this legislature have spoken loud and clear that we support reproductive rights. Whenever the question has been put to the people in other states, they have spoken loudly that they too want reproductive freedom. But other legislatures are proposing these extreme laws that are targeting those in Minnesota and those traveling to Minnesota for care. Projections are that Minnesota will see a 10 to 25% uptick in those seeking reproductive care in our state. We can't let our healthcare providers in Minnesota be sued for doing their job. We must protect them against being targeted for following Minnesota law. Likewise, we must protect our Minnesota residents from being sued for offering a helping hand to an out-of-state friend or family member. We are in uncharted territory. States are passing aggressive, unprecedented laws that a year or two ago would have been considered gross abuses of the judicial system. The Supreme Court wanted states to decide on abortion access. Well, Minnesota has decided, and we will stand firm to protect those who live in our state and who follow our laws. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you,
Point of
Mr.
order, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Long, state your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, under Rule 2.32, no member can speak more than twice on the same matter.
Representative New Brindley, I am going to defer ruling on this point of order, but I hope that out of respect for our rules and for this chamber that you will keep your remarks brief. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good news. They will be brief. And I did stand before the majority leader. I know that that is not customary to speak after the majority leader. But I just want to be very clear. And we keep hearing things on the House floor, and we keep being misled about what is in this bill. We were told that pregnant women deserve care. I agree, but this bill doesn't provide that. This bill does nothing to further abortion access in the state of Minnesota. Nothing. This bill is about the rule of law. So anyone who thinks that this bill is going to give greater access to abortion is just wrong. That's not what this bill does. This bill simply chooses to ignore the rule of law.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative New Brindley yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative New Brindley, in your understanding and reading of this bill, would this allow a doctor like Dr. Gosnell from Philadelphia that was responsible for just abhorrent conditions in the clinic and who was also responsible for children born alive snapping their spinal cords and a couple of women that died under his care, would it allow him, as someone like him, to come to this state and be licensed in Minnesota, and would we have to license them under this bill?
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Scott, I don't know about that specific case because currently in Minnesota, at least for the time being, we do have a Born Alive Infant Act. And that is still in place, at least for now. We actually do think that infants who are born have rights. We do think that in Minnesota right now. Now, I know that there is a move by the majority to eliminate that, to say that infants, even if they're born alive, have no rights. But right now they do. So I'm not sure if that specific instance would qualify, but certainly if someone, if an abortion was banned in the third trimester in another state, something that frankly even has had bipartisan support to ban third trimester abortion, even here in Minnesota, those people, even if they are convicted of a felony, would absolutely be licensed, be eligible to be licensed in the state of Minnesota. And in fact, if that was the only reason they had received a felony, I think we would have to license them. We could not deny them a license even though they chose to break the law, commit a felony level crime. We would have to license them.
Representative Scott.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative New Brindley. That was my interpretation of it, too, and it's not so much which law was broken, but that they broke a law, were charged with a felony, and then could come here and be licensed. So I know y'all are buried in your computer screens and everything, but that is an astounding thing. That's really astounding that we would allow that in our state. Wow. Please vote no.
Further discussion of House File 366. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. I have been reading the fiscal note that comes with this bill, and I found it really interesting to Representative Niska's points about the full faith and credit of the state of Minnesota. The fiscal note, interestingly, does not have any dollar amount attached to it. It expects no cost for this bill to be administered in the state of Minnesota, which is kind of shocking. But they do expect there to be lawsuits, and the Attorney General's office just says they will absorb it, and it will be the same amount as for what they experienced for COVID lawsuits. And I don't know how much money the Attorney General's office went through during COVID to defend lawsuits, but that probably has a number to it, but the fiscal note doesn't have that number. The governor's office also expects that it will incur about 10 hours of work for their legal team on extradition process work, and they decided to absorb that cost. Then we get to the courts, and this is where we get to Representative Nisko's argument about the full faith and credit. It is assumed, according to the fiscal note, that a foreign judgment or a judgment from another state will be enacted. And it is also assumed that this bill authorizes the courts not to provide full faith and credit to foreign judgments that relate to reproductive health care as defined in this bill. It is also assumed that it may interfere with the administrative process for registering foreign judgments, and that it is assumed a judicial officer will be required to review those administrative judgments because now we are not providing full faith and credit. And it is further assumed that the bill will impact the number of motions filed to quash subpoenas, and the fiscal note recommends that it is further assumed this bill provides the authority for the court to quash subpoenas, but a court rule amendment may be required as the court rule is silent on the authority of whether the courts can quash subpoenas. Members, this bill is a mess, and it is harming our ability as a state to function under our Constitution and under the rule of law. It assumes all these different administrative proceedings and judgments are happening, and it provides no money for enacting this bill. And I think it's very unconstitutional, and I'm shocked that the fiscal note says there will be no cost, because the courts are incurring costs, the governor's office is incurring costs, the attorney general is incurring costs, but somehow magically there's no cost in this bill. I've never seen that before, and I just think it shows all the many problems with this bill, and I urge members to vote no.
I recognize the member from Stearns, the Minority Leader, Representative Damath.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And looking at this bill, as you have heard, some of the concerns that have been brought forward, members, that this state would be a place that others, medical professionals, charged with felonies could come and get licensed. There would be nothing in this bill that would prevent that. I have some other comments, but what we heard on the floor today kind of says it all. We heard that not all laws are good laws. This is a terrible law. House File 366 is a terrible direction for Minnesota to be going. Please vote no.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Igbaje.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for the lively debate. I think I'll just go back ahead and say that, what this bill is doing is ensuring that pregnant people can get the health care that they deserve. It's also working to ensure that physicians and healthcare providers who provide abortion care do not feel that they are being unable to provide that care. We've heard stories from around the country where people who want their children, but they have a miscarriage, and they are told that they have to wait until they are incredibly sick before they can have that taken care of in a simple procedure. This bill also only protects those who are coming to Minnesota because the only thing that is off on their record is that they provided legal, standard of care, reproductive health care in the state that they're coming from. But in Minnesota, we say that abortion care is legal, and we are ensuring that we are maintaining the highest standards in our medical care, and so people who are coming to Minnesota must still maintain those standards. At the end, I just want to end with this. We are in uncharted legal territory at this time, and that is the fault of the Supreme Court, and states are doing what they can to protect themselves, to protect their residents, to protect their providers, and that is what we are doing in Minnesota today. So members, I urge you, please vote green.
The clerk will take the roll on House File 366. The clerk will close the roll. There being 68 ayes and 62 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.